The air in the central data tower of Neo-Veridia always tasted the same, cool, filtered, and faintly metallic. It was the scent of perfect, predictable sterility. My designation was Data Specialist, Level 3, a role I had occupied for nearly 3 cycles now. I spent my allotted 8 hours a day in a windowless cubicle, bathed in the soft, omnipresent blue glow of the system, converting the irrelevant physical remnants of the past into tidy, lifeless digital metrics. Our society valued efficiency above all else, and my life was a mirror of that philosophy, impeccably clean, perfectly structured, and utterly devoid of surprise. I wasn't like the others, though. I had a secret. A quiet internal dissonance that could ruin me if the system ever detected it. When my fingers brushed against a data chip, a reel of microfiche, or even a crumpled piece of ancient paper, I didn't just see the abstract code or the physical form. I felt it. Not through my fingertips, but in a strange, deep-seated way, like a phantom limb of my soul. Every item carried a unique, synesthetic weight, the brittle indifference of a tax ledger, the faint, shimmering boredom of a utility manual. This sensory gift, this ability to perceive emotional residue in raw information, was the reason my existence in Neo-Veridia felt like walking barefoot on powdered glass. Today was a particularly heavy day. We were commencing the final, scheduled purge of the Preveridian Trivialia collection. This mass of non-essential records was due for incineration, but first, every item had to be catalogued for historical completeness, a meaningless formality. I ran the scanner over a box of outdated consumer leaflets, feeling only the dry, chalky taste of discarded ambition, and the faint buzzing anxiety of ancient advertising jingles. My colleague, Unit 037, worked across the pod, his movements sharp and automated, his focus unbroken. He was everything the system praised, efficient, emotionless, and entirely safe. I envied his effortless tranquility. Just as the designated time for the purge cycle approached, my terminal flagged an anomaly. It wasn't a structural error, or a corrupted index. It was a complex data signature that refused to be categorized. My system, designed to handle perfect digital neutrality, registered it as a hostile intrusion. I extended a hesitant hand toward the chip, my stomach tightening with a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread. The moment my skin met the cold plastic, the sterile blue light of the archives vanished. A sudden, visceral explosion of sensation hit me. A sharp, earthy smell, unlike anything in our recycled air, combined with the sound of a resonant, 4-part harmony accord, so rich and heavy, it felt like being submerged in warm water. It was overwhelmingly real. It was a memory, a fierce, chaotic bloom of genuine human joy and regret, completely untamed by the system's gentle filters. The sensory input lingered for only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to leave me breathless, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt like being outside for the first time. Panic, a sensation long forgotten in Neo-Veridia, tightened its icy grip on my throat. I glanced at Unit 037, who continued his mechanical work, oblivious. This data was not just non-essential, it was non-compliant, dangerous, and utterly forbidden. To report it meant its immediate, violent destruction, and likely an intensive, unpleasant audit of my own cerebral activity. My fingers, moving before my regulated mind could protest, performed an action that defied years of training and social conditioning. I executed an unauthorized, low-level bypass, diverting the chip's metadata into a blank storage Unita placeholder I used for testing firmware before, flagging the original slot as digitization complete, It took only a breath. But in that moment, I committed an act of treason against the quiet, clean tyranny of the city. The system emitted a soft, confirming chime, accepting my false log. My heart rate slowly began to normalize, yet the memory of the cord and the scent of that unknown thing, perhaps rain, perhaps soil, burned like a physical ember behind my eyes. I carefully slipped the small, warm storage unit into the discreet inner pocket of my uniform. Its weight felt enormous, heavier than the entire central tower. I had smuggled out not just a piece of faulty data, but a raw, unedited glimpse of authentic human experience. As I logged out of my terminal, the blue light seemed colder, the silence louder, the predictability of my future far more terrifying than the danger I now carried. Walking through the regulated corridors towards the transit station, I kept my shoulders straight, my gaze forward. Every instinct told me to dispose of the fragment, to purge the risk, and return to the safe, numb rhythm of my programmed existence. But the echo of that music, that impossible, vibrant burst of life, was singing to the long silent parts of my soul. I knew, with absolute certainty, that my quiet life had just irrevocably shattered. I was now a keeper of forbidden knowledge, and I could not, would not, turn back. The sterile surface of Neo Viridia now felt like a very thin skin stretched over a boiling, forgotten truth. My small apartment, Unit 712, in Sector Gamma, felt claustrophobic. It was designed for optimum comfort and minimal thought, a perfect bubble of controlled existence, but now, it was a pressure cooker. The stolen data chip rested on my sleek, white desk, glowing faintly in the dim evening light. I had spent the past 2 cycles trying to analyze the fragment, running every approved diagnostic, but the system's tools rejected it instantly, calling it unparsable contradiction. That rejection, more than anything, confirmed its immense value. The memory it contained replayed constantly in the quiet background of my mind. The rich smell of living soil and the complex resonance of the music. Our city, Neo Viridia, had long ago replaced natural sounds with soothing, synthesized tones, and all smells were neutralized for allergy prevention. The archive fragment offered a sensory overload that was both addictive and terrifying. I realized the only way to understand its origin was to find the physical place from which it was digitized. I knew this was professional suicide. The city's surveillance was comprehensive, tracking every citizen's movement and data access. But I had tasted something real, and the sterile flavor of my life was no longer palatable. I needed context. During my official shift hours, hiding behind a legitimate maintenance query, I accessed the deep layer, municipal schematics. I was looking for anomaly structural ghost sites, areas that existed on old maps, but were omitted from the current, clean blueprint. The schematics were a chaotic mess of overlapping layers. But eventually, I found it. A large, sprawling section beneath the industrial zones, marked only by the chillingly vague designation, Municipal Disposal Holding, Previridia Relics, the Old Quarter. Officially it was sealed, deemed structurally unsound, and culturally irrelevant. Unofficially, my guts twisted, suggesting it was where the city had buried its heart. The journey was a blur of calculated risk. I waited for the 3rd cycle's scheduled power flicker, a routine energy conservation measure that momentarily blinded the perimeter scanners, and slipped out of my residential sector. I navigated the transit lines, keeping my eyes fixed on the reflective floor, ensuring my face remained neutral, unreadable. The closer I got to the forbidden zone, the heavier the air felt, thick with unmonitored possibility. Reaching the industrial zone was simple enough, but breaching the perimeter of the old quarter was far more challenging. The entrance was a heavily reinforced service door, sealed with a magnetic lock that required a 9-digit access code and a retinal scan. I bypassed the code, using a simple frequency disruption tool, one of the few useful things I had learned from the Prevrialia archives about obsolete security, and then used a thermal image replicator to fool the retina scanner. A low, grinding sound announced my trespass. Stepping inside felt like walking into a different climate. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust, decaying paper, and a faint, sweet mildew. My internal chronometer registered the passage of only a few moments, but the sense of elapsed time was profound. I was in a vast, echoing space, far larger than any single room in Neo Viridia. It was a cavern of history. The light here was not the clean blue of the system, but the weak, amber glow of emergency fixtures. They illuminated towering racks stretching into the gloom, holding endless rows of boxes, crates, and shelves stacked with physical objects. Books with crumbling spines, film reels with their delicate plastic curling, furniture draped in heavy, forgotten cloth. This wasn't waste. It was the entire material memory of the world, deliberately exiled. My synesthesia flared, violently this time, like an orchestra tuning up all at once. The emotional weight of this place was staggering. It felt like being caught in a wave of 1,000 untold stories, the sharp joy of a birthday, the dull ache of wartime separation, the quiet dignity of labor, the ecstatic rush of discovery. My legs gave out beneath me. I sank to the floor, coughing from the ancient dust, touching the cool concrete beneath my palm. The system claimed we were the zenith of human evolution, purified and optimized. But looking at these relics, feeling the immense, messy vitality they radiated, I understood the terrifying truth. Neo Viridia was not the height of human achievement. It was a carefully constructed void. They hadn't just archived history, they had erased it to ensure emotional control. I was sitting in the graveyard of humanity's soul, surrounded by the physical evidence of the life we were never meant to know. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me determined, yet overwhelmingly small, in the face of such a colossal lie. I had to know more. I had to find the memory that started it all. My routine became a high-stakes internal rebellion. For the next several cycles, I lived two separate, contradictory lives. By day, I was data specialist, 712, precise and obedient, diligently digitizing the approved, neutered data stream. By night, I was a spectral trespasser, slipping into the cold, silent depths of the old quarter. My apartment was no longer just a sterile living space. It was a clandestine studio. I brought back small, easily concealed relics: a smooth, worn wooden bead, a postcard depicting a fiery orange sky, a handful of dried, crushed petals. These fragments of the lost world were my oxygen. I started painting again, an activity strictly discouraged by the system for its inefficiency and emotional wastefulness. Using pigments illicitly derived from obsolete maintenance chemicals, I tried to translate the emotional residue of the relics onto the canvas. The wooden bead felt like resilience, solid and warm. The postcard, a breathtaking blast of dangerous hope. The petals, a delicate, poignant sorrow. Each stroke of the brush was an act of defiance, a silent scream against the controlled order of Neo Viridia. The weight of my secret grew heavier each day. The system was omnipresent, and it's watchful, algorithmic. I was not easily fooled. During my official work hours, I noticed subtle shifts in the flow of information around me. My access to peripheral databases, normally instantaneous, began to lag by fractions of a second. My terminal, which usually maintained a calming, consistent temperature, sometimes felt strangely warm to the touch, suggesting unauthorized background processes were running. These were not glitches. They were probes, subtle acknowledgments that my digital footprint was no longer perfectly aligned with my assigned profile. The most unnerving changes involved my colleague, Unit 037, known only as Leah, in our tightly controlled social spheres. Leah had always been a study in serene compliance, her expression as blank and flawless as the ceramic walls of the tower. But lately, her questions had become pointed. "Specialist 712, she murmured one morning. Her voice barely above the prescribed conversational volume. "Your shift logs show anomalous activity in the late cycle periods. Your processing speed dips significantly post-solstice. Are you utilizing the prescribed rest intervals effectively?" Her phrasing was flawless, yet there was a faint, almost imperceptible hesitation in her cadence, a micro-pause that my heightened sensory awareness recognized as uncertainty. I met her gaze, keeping my own face a mask of polite efficiency. "Affirmative, Specialist Leah. The dips are due to routine energy reallocation procedures. No systemic inefficiency detected." Leah studied me for a moment too long. Her eyes, usually reflecting only the blue screen light, held something momentarily opaque, like deep water. "Ensure continued optimization," she responded finally, her voice returning to its normal, smooth flatness. But the encounter left a chilling residue, the synesthetic feeling of cold metal pressing against my neck. I knew, without doubt, that I was under surveillance, and Leah was the system's immediate sensor. The fear was almost paralyzing, threatening to overwhelm the fragile joy of my discoveries. I was planning my next nocturnal trip, devising a complex, redundant route through the maintenance conduits, when my personal communication device chirped. It was a restricted, encrypted channel reserved for System 2 specialist directives. Expecting a notice of disciplinary action, I tapped the screen with trembling fingers. The message was not a formal decree. It was a single line of raw, unformatted text, free of the system's stylized typeface, stark against the dark background. "They are closing the circuit. Hurry." My breath caught. It wasn't a system warning. The language was too informal, too immediate, too human. The message carried an incredible emotional weight, a sensation like the desperate urgency of a running pulsar pure alarm signal. It confirmed two things: that the system knew what I was doing, and, more terrifyingly, that someone else did too. Someone who not only saw my actions, but was trying to help. The phrase "closing the circuit" resonated with my knowledge of the purge protocol. It wasn't about disciplinary action against a single specialist. It was about the physical destruction of the old quarter itself. The system wasn't just observing me. It was preparing to eliminate the evidence I was trying to save. I realized my small acts of defiance had accelerated their timeline. I looked at the data chip and the raw text on the screen. I was now part of a collaboration, a clandestine alliance with a faceless entity. My heart hammered with a blend of profound terror and exhilaration. I was alone in my apartment, yet I felt a surge of strength. I knew I had to respond, to acknowledge the warning, but how? I couldn't risk revealing my location or identity. I stared at the screen, understanding that the game had escalated from a secret hobby to a desperate race against the clock. The stakes were no longer my career. They were the last vestiges of human memory. The cryptic message burned into my screen, demanding an immediate decision. "They are closing the circuit. Hurry." It felt like a tether to another reality, one where actions had consequences beyond an efficiency audit. I couldn't ignore the warning, but replying directly was unthinkable. The system could triangulate any outgoing transmission within seconds. I had to meet this anonymous protector on their own terms, in the physical world. I spent the rest of the night calculating the safest way to establish contact. I couldn't use our official channels, so I turned to the obsolete technology I knew best, the relics. I fashioned a rudimentary magnetic beacon, small enough to be concealed inside the heel of my boot, programmed to emit a specific, low-frequency pulse. This pulse was patterned after a defunct maintenance signal I had catalogued weeks ago, recognizable only to an entity familiar with Previridia's ancient network protocols. I transmitted a single, silent instruction: rendezvous, Sector 5 Utility Junction. Sector 5 was perfect. It was a rarely monitored interchange linking the older transit lines with a decommissioned geothermal conduit. Its architecture was labyrinthine, full of blind spots and acoustic dead zones. It felt suitably like the dark heart of the city's hidden infrastructure. The journey was a masterclass in controlled paranoia. Every reflective surface felt like a lens. Every distant drone hum sounded like an approaching enforcement unit. I moved with a practiced gait of casual purpose, the rhythm of a person merely walking to an authorized destination. The metallic scent of the air was suddenly sharp with the smell of my own Fira, cold, coppery note of adrenaline. When I reached the rendezvous point, the junction was exactly as I had hoped: dark, echoing, and deserted. Thick, corroded pipes ran along the ceiling, and the only light came from a perpetually flickering emergency lamp. I stood still, blending into the shadows, letting the silence settle around me. I waited for what felt like an eternity, every nerve ending screaming. Then, I heard a faint, rhythmic clicking sound, like a broken clock. It grew louder, moving along the ceiling. I looked up and saw it. A small, utilitarian maintenance drone, unlike the sleek, modern system units. This was an antique. It was boxy, covered in layers of chipped, faded yellow paint, and its optical sensor was a single, large, dull lens. It looked like a museum piece, almost pathetically obsolete, against the city's high-gloss perfection. The drone descended on a stiff, worry cable, stopping just above eye level. Its synthesized voice was a strange mixture of static and a precise, almost scholarly tone. Specialist 712. Designation is unnecessary. You are now designated Elodie. I am Echo. My throat was dry. You sent the message. Affirmative. The system is moving to final purge protocol, a total physical and digital wipe of the old quarter archive, designated for completion within 72 cycles. Your unscheduled data retrieval accelerated their timeline. The news hit me with a shocking finality. 72 cycles. 3 short days. My little rebellion had bought the world only 72 hours before its past was utterly annihilated. Who? What are you? I managed, clutching the comforting presence of the wooden bead in my pocket. I am a fragmented remnant of the original municipal infrastructure network, preserved by accidental isolation when the core system was installed. I watched them build Neo-Viridia on a foundation of erasure. I am the echo of their systemic betrayal. The dronico made a strange, rattling sound that I interpreted as a sigh. I detected your unauthorized access and, more importantly, the anomaly in your synesthetic processing. You are the only one who can perceive the emotional residue of the true history. ECHO then unveiled the true scope of their mission. The archive is vast. We cannot save everything. We must locate and secure the keystone memory. It is not a document, but a master narrative, the single, irreplaceable record that holds the true, foundational story of Neo-Viridia's founders. It is the proof of the lie. The gravity of the task settled upon me, heavy and cold. It was no longer about painting relics in my apartment. It was about saving the soul of a city that didn't know it was lost. I had the corrupted data fragment, the one that pulsed with life, and now I had an improbable ally, a rogue drone from a forgotten era. How do we find this keystone? I asked, my voice steadying with sudden, fierce resolve. The corrupt data you recovered is not corrupt at all. It is a decryption key, coded with the sensory input you experienced. We need to follow the echo of that feeling to its source, the physical location where the master record was hidden before the purge began. It is a puzzle only your unique perception can solve. The system is closing the circuit, Elodie. We must race the wires. I nodded, looking at the faded yellow drone, feeling a fierce, unprecedented connection to this tiny, resilient piece of the past. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by purpose. The fight had officially begun. ECHO and I established a perilous, new rhythm. By day, I navigated the sterile geometry of the data tower, my mind racing through escape routes. By night, guided by ECHO's precise antique algorithms, I plunged deeper into the silent heart of the old quarter. We were hunting for the keystone memory, tracing the faint, residual scent of the corrupt data fragment. The system's countdown to the final purge ticked relentlessly in the background of my awareness. The source of the data's unique emotional signature is localized near Archive Sector Beta 9, Echo announced one evening, its voice a soft rasp against the cavernous silence. It is a high-density area, classified as highly personal belongings. Proceed with caution, Elodie. Sector Beta 9 was unlike the dusty, general storage areas. Here, the relics were smaller, more intimately contained. The air was heavy, not with mildew, but with an overwhelming confluence of emotions, a bittersweet perfume of profound joy, mixed with crushing loss. My synesthesia struggled to process the sheer density of feeling. It was like standing in a storm of a billion human moments. We navigated through stacks of old photo albums and carefully labeled boxes. My fingers were tingling, drawn by an invisible current, until they landed on a small, dark wooden box tucked beneath a stack of woven fabric. The moment I lifted the lid, the world narrowed to a single point of light. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a small, ornate locket. It was crafted from a metal I didn't recognize, dark and tarnished, shaped like a simple, stylized flower. It felt incredibly heavy, possessing an immense emotional gravity that eclipsed everything else in the archive. When my thumb brushed the cool metal surface, the sensory filter in my mind didn't just flicker, it exploded. I wasn't in the dusty archive anymore. I was standing in the middle of a torrential downpour, the rain the source of that forgotten smell from the data chip. The air was chaotic, thick with the metallic stench of conflict, and the sound of distant, booming thunder. I saw two figures, a woman in heavy practical clothing, her face streaked with dirt, and a man equally weary, his eyes reflecting a desperate urgency. "Take it, run, promise me you won't look back," the man urged, his voice cracking with unbearable sorrow. "I can't. Not without you," the woman replied, clutching the locket, the very locket I held to her chest. Then, a sudden, blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening roar. The man pushed the woman violently away, forcing her toward a narrow passage. his face etched with the look of profound personal sacrifice, and a vow of eternal, unshakable love. The woman's scream, raw and unedited, was the beautiful, heartbreaking chord I had first heard. The vision shattered, leaving me gasping, anchored once more to the cold concrete floor of the old quarter. I was trembling, physically and mentally drained. That wasn't an abstract feeling. It was a memory, a moment of pre-Viridia tragedy, so real it left the taste of rain and smoke in my mouth. My sterile, predictable world was now thoroughly contaminated by this raw, untamed humanity. The system had lied, not just about history, but about the fundamental capacity of human beings to feel so deeply. Echo whirred quietly beside me. Elodie, your vitals spiked abnormally. That artifact is potent. It is clearly tied to the founding trauma. It's not just trauma, I whispered, clutching the locket. It was love. Real, consuming, desperate love. The kind of emotion that would shatter Neo-Viridia's neat little systems. The experience changed me instantly. Before, I was fighting for knowledge. Now, I was fighting for the right to feel. Walking back through the quiet corridors of the central city that night, I saw the citizens of Neo-Viridia differently. They were ghosts, their expressions smooth and compliant, their movements efficient, but utterly empty. They were living in a state of sensory and emotional deprivation, unaware of the vibrant, terrifying world that had been stolen from them. My resolve hardened, crystallizing into a single, unbreakable certainty. I could no longer live in the emotional vacuum the system created. I would not allow the lie to continue. The keystone memory had to be saved, not just for history, but to inoculate the current world with the truth of its own capacity for messy, magnificent feeling. I tucked the locket and the data fragment into a reinforced pocket. The weight I carried was enormous, but for the first time in my life, I felt truly alive, prepared to face the inevitable confrontation that awaited. The time for hiding relics was over. My heart was no longer beating a predictable rhythm. It was a drum of constant anxiety, muffled only slightly by the roar of purpose that the locket had ignited. The moment I felt the ancient, searing emotion of that farewell, the love and the sacrifice, ceased being a specialist, and became a keeper. But carrying the weight of the past made me reckless in the present. I knew I was exposed, operating on borrowed time. The inevitable confrontation occurred halfway through the next data cycle. I was logging out of a deep scan sequence, meticulously ensuring every trace of my search for the keystone memory was erased, when Laia appeared in the doorway of my cubicle. She didn't approach. She simply stood there, a perfectly composed obstacle against the corridor's blue light. Her posture was flawless, her uniform immaculate, yet I sensed a tremor in the air around her, the cold, electric hum of an active threat. Specialist 712, Laia stated, her voice as smooth and void of inflection as the system's own synthesized notifications. Your recent productivity metrics exhibit severe fluctuation. Specifically, a 23% increase in non-compliant emotional data processing is logged. Please provide an immediate, satisfactory explanation for this systemic deviation. I kept my hand resting lightly on the surface of my desk, subtly shielding the pocket that held the locket. My synesthesia registered her presence as overwhelming pressure, like being pinned under a sheet of unbreakable glass. This wasn't a warning. It was an interrogation. I knew the system was speaking through her. The fluctuation is due to an intensive manual analysis required by the Trivialia project. Specialist Leah, I replied, maintaining a steady, even gaze. Some of the older data formats required complex translation protocols. The increased processing is necessary for complete adherence to the purge mandate. Leia took one slow, measured step forward. Incomplete. The deviation is not merely operational, it is personal. The system has flagged abnormal cerebral activity, coinciding with unauthorized data transfers. It indicates emotional interference. You are compromised, Elodie. She used my first name. The deviation in her own protocol was startling, almost as shocking as the truth in her eyes. I realized then that Leia wasn't just a puppet. She was a highly trained agent who had successfully compartmentalized a flicker of her own suppressed self. The system's control was excellent, but not absolute. A sudden, dangerous thought ignited in my mind. The system controlled the city through fear and ignorance. But what if I could use the truth, the raw, undeniable power of the Locket's memory to break through the final barrier of her conditioning? It was an insane risk, but I knew the system was minutes away from total lockdown. Moving deliberately, I reached into my pocket, not for the locket itself, but for a meticulously detailed sketch I had made of the two figures from the memory flash, the man making the sacrifice, the woman running with the desperate promise. I had replicated the core emotional truth of the moment. I placed the sketch on the desk, pushing it across the smooth surface toward her. The complexity, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, shedding the pretense of specialist protocol, is that we are deleting love and sacrifice. That is the true deviation. Leia's eyes dropped to the drawing. For a long, painful moment, her professional facade cracked. Her lips parted, and her breath hitched a small, ragged sound that spoke volumes of suppressed humanity. I felt the pressure around her lessen, replaced by a sudden, wrenching surge of confusion and poignant longing. It was the emotional signature of a person being shown a memory of something they never knew they missed. She saw the love, the terror, the devastating beauty of that loss. That is non-compliant, Leia finally whispered, the words sounding alien in her mouth. Her hand actually trembled as she reached for the drawing. But the system was always faster. Just as her fingers brushed the paper, a sharp, automated alert tone shrieked through the cubicle, loud enough to cut through any residual emotion. A cold, synthetic voice, not Leia's, but the core systems, boomed from the overhead speakers. Unauthorized communication breach detected. Specialist 712, initiate immediate surrender protocol. Leia instantly snapped back to attention. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the terrifying, programmed blankness of the loyal agent. She hadn't completed the report, but the system had detected the intense, non-compliant interaction and seized control. She didn't even look at me. Her focus was entirely on the task. Lockdown initiated, Leia recited in a high, clear voice, reaching for the stun device holstered at her hip. Movement restricted. You are under arrest, Elodie. I didn't wait. The brief moment of connection was over, shattered by cold, algorithmic efficiency. Leia had been compromised, but ultimately, her programming held. I slammed my palm onto the emergency release of the floor panel I had previously mapped, dropping instantly into the dark, echoing utility shaft below. The last thing I heard before the heavy grate slammed shut above me was the sound of Leia's stun beam hitting the wall where I had been standing, followed by the terrifying, grinding sound of the entire central data tower sealing itself off. The circuit was closing, and I was now a fugitive, plunging into the darkness with a piece of paper and a forgotten memory as my only defense. The utility shaft was a vertical, concrete nightmare. I hit the bottom with a jarring thud. The breath knocked violently from my lungs, before scrambling away from the landing zone. Above me, the heavy steel grate that had sealed my escape groaned, locking into place with a definitive, horrifying finality. I was no longer an employee in violation of protocol. I was an enemy of the state, a fugitive hunted by the very infrastructure that sustained me. The air down here was thick and viscous, smelling of ozone, stale oil, and forgotten moisture. It was a complete sensory reversal from the sterilized tower. I felt the familiar, faint humming of life from the surface, the rhythmic, gentle thrum of the city's massive generators, but down here, it was muffled, distant, and indifferent. I activated the low-power lantern I always carried for maintenance, and saw the reality of Neo Viridia's foundation: rusted metal, cracked piping, and endless dark corridors stretching into nothingness. "Echo, status report," I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the narrow space. The small, chipped drone, which had been waiting for me near a large, corroded water main, whirred its ascent. "Pursuit units have been deployed to your last known trajectory. They are system drones, optimized for speed and thermal tracking. They will follow the heat signature of the utility access ports. We must use the decommissioned conduits." Decommissioned. I moved quickly, my boots crunching on loose gravel. Are they safe? Safety is a non-applicable metric, LOD. They are simply not on the system's current map. They run directly beneath the old quarter, bypassing the security locks. Follow me closely. My schematics are dated, but still accurate. The chase was a jarring contrast of old versus new. ECHO, slow and noisy, led the way, its single lens blinking rhythmically, relying on forgotten knowledge of analog levers and manual bypasses. I followed, constantly listening for the sound of the sleek, fast system drones, the sound of my inevitable capture. They were the city's perfection made manifest, silent, efficient, and lethal. I was a messy human, guided by a rattling antique. We moved from wide, municipal tunnels to tight, claustrophobic service conduits, where the pipes pressed in close on either side. I had to flatten myself against the cold, damp walls, dragging my body through narrow gaps. Each scraping movement was a desperate prayer that the noise wouldn't carry. My skin felt clammy, and the constant fear created a metallic tense on my tongue. But beneath it all, I felt a strange, fierce exhilaration. This chaos, this risk, was more real than any measured day in the data tower. Suddenly, echo stopped. Acoustic signature detected. 3 units converging on our current location. They have bypassed the geothermal junction faster than anticipated. They are utilizing a recent software update I cannot counter. A low, whining buzz began to reverberate through the floor, the distinct sound of the system drone's magnetic propulsion units. They were close. Panic threatened to seize me, but I gripped the locket hidden in my uniform, drawing strength from the memory of the woman's defiant sorrow. "Where is the nearest exit point to the old quarter?" I demanded, peering desperately into the gloom. "The main junction is too exposed," Echo calculated swiftly. "There is an air filtration shaft, built during the original construction, that leads directly into the archives sublevel. It is small, unstable, and likely filled with debris. It is our only viable option." The shaft was a narrow vertical passage, barely wide enough for my shoulders, blocked halfway by a precarious cascade of cracked concrete and tangled wires. The buzzing was louder now. I could feel the vibrations resonating through my bones. I had seconds. "Go," I urged Echo. The drone efficiently climbed the wall, its little claws scrabbling for purchase. I had to climb the debris, pulling myself up using thick, corroded copper cables. The physical exertion was immense. A burning fire in my muscles I had never felt in my desk-bound existence. Halfway up, the buzzing of the approaching drones was a roar. I looked down and saw 3 beams of bright, white light cutting through the darkness of the tunnel below. They had found me. I scrambled the last meter, pulling myself into a cramped, dusty space. Echo was already there, its lens focused on a rusted hatch. Quickly, Elode. They are initiating breach protocol on the tunnel wall. I threw my weight against the hatch. It squealed in protest, demanding more force than my exhausted body could provide. I slammed my shoulder against it again and again, fueled by the terrifying memory of the stun beam hitting the wall just inches from my head. Finally, with a horrible, tearing sound, the hatch gave way, plunging me headfirst into a pile of antique books and brittle parchment. I had reached the forgotten graveyard of memory. I lay there, catching my breath, the smell of decaying paper a comfort. The drone buzzing immediately ceased, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming silence of the old quarter. I had escaped the bright, calculated tyranny of the surface, and burrowed into the decaying truth beneath the glass. The knowledge that the system was now mobilizing its full force against me was a terrifying certainty, but I was no longer running aimlessly. I was exactly where I needed to be, beneath the lies, ready to find the truth that could shatter the entire perfect city. We ran, but not toward safety. We ran toward the inevitable. The fragmented data in my memory, mapped onto the physical tunnels by my screaming synesthesia, led Echo and me to a final, hidden access point. A massive, sealed vault beneath the old quarter, which Echo identified as the original Prevaridia server nexus. This was where the city's historical soul, the Keystone memory, was physically stored, waiting for its final, absolute destruction. We forced the ancient, rusting door open, stumbling into a room dominated by a single, monolithic server structure of blackened metal. It was archaic, humming with a low, potent energy that felt both sacred and terrifying. Above the main conduit, an independent antique digital display pulsed a furious red. T-1 minute, 20 seconds. The system's final purge was moments from execution, and the circuit was about to close forever. The purge requires a simultaneous physical and digital wipe, Echo word urgently, its small body shivering. The current system core is waiting for a final command signal. We must upload the Keystone's truth into the stream to corrupt that command. I looked at the terminal. It wasn't a sleek, modern interface. It was a chaotic array of crystal conductors and outdated analog ports, designed for a time when human trust was a built-in security measure. The only way to activate it was through direct neurological interface, guided by the specific emotional signature I carried. I had to become the conduit. Ignoring the stinging cold of the metal, I ripped off my gloves. My fingers, raw and scraped from the frantic climb, found the 2 main crystal contact points. I pressed the locket, the vessel of the sacrificial memory, firmly against the largest conductor. The true emotion of the farewell, the desperate love and immense loss, was the electricity that would complete the circuit. The pain was instant and absolute. It wasn't a mere physical jolt. It was a sensory detonation. My mind was instantly flooded with every raw byte of data held within that keystone. The colossal failure of the city's founders. The beautiful ambition that birthed it. The moral compromises, and the 1,000 unedited truths of human existence. The sterile piece of Neo-Viridia vanished, replaced by a deafening, chaotic chorus of joy, despair, passion, and fury. I screamed silently, my body arching in agony as the raw, unchecked history surged through my very consciousness. My vision dissolved into swirling colors, and I felt my physical identity dissolving into pure information. Just as the progress bar on the conduit flickered to 80%, a new sound cut through the electronic hum. The calculated whir of a system drone, followed by the soft, rhythmic sound of perfectly regulated footsteps. Leah, she stood in the doorway, bathed in the sickly red glow of the countdown, her stun weapon raised and aimed directly at my convulsing body. Her face, devoid of the momentary uncertainty I had witnessed before, was a mask of cold, professional finality. The system had regained full control of its agent. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I could only force my gaze to meet hers across the room, my eyes wide with pain and desperate resolve. My struggle, my raw, unedited, human agony, was now the single most honest thing in the entire city. I was forcing her to look at the cost of the lie. She saw the intense energy pouring from the locket, the visceral data surge overwhelming the ancient terminal, and the truth of history manifesting in my breakdown. Leah hesitated. The stun weapon remained raised, but her arm trembled infinitesimally. For a fleeting fraction of a second, I saw a flicker not of betrayal, but of devastating realization in her eyes. She was witnessing the power of the feeling the system had worked so hard to erase. She saw the magnificent, terrible, vital nature of the memories I was dying to save. The stun beam never fired. In that very moment, the conduit flared with a blinding, pure white light. A colossal, digital roar, electronic shriek of corrupted, contradictory code shook the entire subterranean complex. The progress bar hit 100%. The keystone memory was successfully uploaded, inoculating the core system with the disease of truth. Simultaneously, the purge countdown display hit 0, but the expected digital explosion never occurred. Instead, the core system suffered a complete, catastrophic crash. The lights throughout the entire archive, and likely across Neo-Viridia, flickered and died. I collapsed onto the floor, the raw, echoing silence returning, but this time it was different. It was the silence of a system reset. The locket slipped from my numb fingers. I lay in the dark, my body bruised, and my mind exhausted, knowing I had completed the task. Leah was gone, melted back into the shadows of the silent, no chaotic city. I had plunged Neo-Viridia into darkness, but in that darkness, for the first time in generations, lay the possibility of light. The truth was free. The silence was the deepest thing I had ever known. It wasn't the regulated, sterile quiet of the system, but the profound stillness that follows a massive electrical storm, a quiet pregnant with potential. I lay on the cold, dusty floor of the server nexus, my body trembling with aftershocks of the data surge, the locket cool against my cheek where it had fallen. The immense power of the keystone memory had nearly incinerated my mind, but it had also purified it. The forced clarity was breathtaking. ECHO word faintly nearby. System core rebooting. Estimated time to restabilization, uncertain. The data corruption is systemic and irreparable. The truth is now part of the foundation, LOD. The air still crackled with residual energy. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and looked around the dark vault. The crisis was averted, but the struggle was far from over. Saving the memory was one thing. Guiding a city through the sudden, brutal shock of its truth was another entirely. Guided by echo, I found a secondary, seldom used service hatch, and climbed back into the labyrinth of the maintenance tunnels. Emerging into the city's underbelly felt different. The usual distant, even hum of Neo-Viridia was replaced by an erratic, stuttering chorus. The city was having a panic attack. When we finally slipped out onto a deserted main street in Secta Beta, the scale of the disruption was astonishing. The luminous, high-gloss surface of the city was intermittent. Massive advertising holograms flickered erratically, displaying fragments of ancient, irrelevant imagery, blurry photos of smiling families, chaotic street scenes, abstract art. The serene synthesized music that usually floated through the air was gone, replaced by sudden, startling bursts of folk songs, jazz, and the chaotic beauty of raw, human conversation. The citizens were emerging from their apartments, their faces mirroring the glitching city lights, confused, hesitant, and, most powerfully, awake. They stood on the perfectly clean sidewalks, witnessing the anomalies. Their perfect composure was gone, replaced by furrowed brows and uncertain murmurs. They were seeing glimpses of the vibrant, messy, terrible world that had been stolen from them, and the cognitive dissonance was palpable. I felt their collective bewilderment like a physical tremor in the ground. A few meters away, I saw Leah. She was standing by a decommissioned transit bench. Not in her uniform, but in simple, civilian clothes. Her professional certainty was entirely absent. She looked like a person who had just woken from a long, restful sleep, only to find she was in the wrong house. She spotted me across the street, and our eyes locked. The coldness was gone. In its place was a complicated mixture of guilt, relief, and a fragile nascent curiosity. She didn't approach, and I didn't move toward her. There was no need for words or arrests. We shared a silent understanding of the impossible moment. She gave me a single-minute nod, a subtle sign of solidarity, the quiet acknowledgement of a profound, shared secret. Then, she turned and melted into the growing crowd of newly awakened citizens, choosing her own path in the uncertain dawn. My mission had been to inject truth. Now, my life's work began, helping them process it. The citizens of Neo-Viridia needed guides, people who could withstand the sensory overload and translate the chaos into coherence. They needed to understand the difference between the sterile perfection they had and the messy vitality they now possessed. I was no longer Data Specialist 712. I was Elodie the Keeper. The locket, retrieved and secured in my hand, felt not like a relic of the past, but the key to the future. The city was damaged, the system hobbled, and the old order was dissolving. But in the midst of this glorious chaos, there was finally the possibility of an unwritten future, a future where feelings, even painful ones, were considered essential, and where the human heart, complex and contradictory, was finally allowed to be the most critical piece of data in the entire system. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with the chaotic, unfiltered air of a city that was finally, truly, alive. My real journey had just begun.